Bret Hart, thank you. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Nice to be here.
So why now? I guess that's the big question for everybody. Why now?
Well, you know, I said the same thing, and I kept saying, why not? Like, you know, basically, I'm more than the single biggest reason that I found myself doing this is that I was bored. Mm-hmm. And I watched the wrestling, and I, you know, sometimes sitting around, and I have a pretty good life. And my book has done well, and I'm happy with things right now. And like I have a house in Hawaii. I'm just sitting there and I'm watching wrestling, and all the time I'm going, I should do something while I still can. Mm-hmm. This storyline with Vince McMahon would probably fit in pretty good right now. It would work, and it would probably give me something to do. And you know, just instead of thinking about doing it, why don't you just? And then you start reasoning all the reasons why. You know, in the past history and the bad blood and everything, and that weighs a lot. Trust me, it weighs a lot. And I said I'd never go back. But then you see some of the positive things that can come out of it, and it's like it starts to even out. And in the end, I certainly don't want to go down in history as being this bitter sort of champion wrestler that walked away and never came back, and it was bad blood that till the day he died kind of thing. You know, I think I've learned after all that I went through with that, you know, it's better to take a negative and make it into a positive.
Right.
And more often than not, when you put logic to it, it's easier to forgive and move on rather than. And you know, and in the end, Vince McMahon, you know, you can say whatever you want about him, but I'm probably wouldn't be talking to you right now if it wasn't for him. So you look at all the good that did come out of being Bret the Hitman Hart and working for Vince McMahon, and him taking the chance on me and saying a long time ago and saying, "We're going to make you my champion." And you know, those were the happiest days of my life. And it's like going back and doing what I'm doing right now was just to me, I know this is really a stretch, but I sometimes get mad that the Beatles never went back together. You know, that they just never did for charity or for sick kids or something, that they didn't go back and do one album or one tour or one concert even.
Right.
That they fought and bitched so much that they couldn't, you know, they got so big that they couldn't do something good for the world. Not that I'm in that category, but you know, if you start to think and you go, why couldn't Bret Hart come back and do something? Mm-hmm. I mean, you get to that point and you start thinking all the different things you could do. You know, Bret Hart washing up on the shores of TNA would be, you know, you'd be a miserable person for that mistake. Mm-hmm. You know, you'd never do that again. I worked with Hogan and Bischoff in WCW and went nowhere. But aside
we'll
from
get to that later.
Aside from that, like in the end, the only guy I really could do any kind of wrestling storyline with would be Vince McMahon, and it could be huge, and it could be really big, and could be a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Or you can just sit and think about it forever and feel bad that you didn't do it.
I guess the other big question then would be, how long? Is WrestleMania the end? Or
I don't know.
Do you want to stick around? What do you want to do?
Well, you know, I have a girlfriend that's up here going to university, and she's going to be in school for 2 years, so I'm not going to be able to sort of abandon her here and leave and go back to Hawaii where I have a sort of a second life there.
Right.
So I'm kind of stuck here for a couple of years till she gets out of school, gets her university done. And that's when this whole thing came into effect was me thinking I'll be home in Calgary in winter, 2 years, hard time. You know, Calgary winter is no fun, especially for me. And so I just thought, you know, this is my free pass to get out of town every week and go somewhere and do something fun. The more I added it up, like I said, there was more positives, and it was like, yeah, why not? Mm-hmm. And I did it more because of the boredom of sitting around Calgary, sort of. You know, in my head, I don't see this as a long career, that's for sure. And but I wouldn't rule anything out. My attitude is that as long as it's fun, I'll keep going with it.
So right now you're just basically contractually obligated until WrestleMania kind of thing?
Yeah, as of April 1st, I don't have any kind of arrangement. But they're working on some kind of a plan they're going to show me that would make it worth my while to keep going. Cool. And I don't know that, you know, I'm sure that they can come up with something that would got to be some kind of fun with Natty and Harry and so my niece and nephew and all that. It would be nice to, I don't know if that'll happen anytime soon, but somewhere down the road to reach down and kind of pull them up, get them involved in something. And
well, I heard that was one of the reasons why you came back too, was
if I can somehow, and to keep, you know, there's some people that don't recognize how hard those two kids, or the three of them with TJ, how hard they've worked to get where they are. And you talk about chasing a dream. I mean, that dream was all but extinguished in my family when Owen died and the things that I went through. And for these younger, the next generation to want it so bad to carry the torch that to the next, like from my father to me to, to them, to have gone and done it all on their own against all the sort of criticism and negative people in the family, even that say, "Oh, don't waste your time doing that," And now they're doing it and they're traveling around the world, and the more I've watched them over the years, the more proud I am of just the fact that they hung in there and they've got there on their own. Bret Hart didn't open any doors for them, and Stu Hart never opened any doors for them. They chipped away on their own.
What about your kids? They're at that age where they could get.
My youngest one is a possibility, but I don't know. I kind of let them figure it out themselves. But he's got the muscle milk shakes and stuff, and he's working out every day, and I think there's a reason for it.
Well, speaking of working out every day, I guess you got to be back in the gym every day preparing for this match.
Pretty much, as best I can anyway. But the truth is, I've always trained all the time. I sometimes take a few months off or a few weeks off, but I always get back, and I find that I think it's just a good way to take care of yourself. And I still stay in pretty good shape. I ride my bike a lot in the summers up here, and in Hawaii I ride the bike most of the winter. And I try to train. I try to take good care of myself, and I eat pretty good.
Cool. How are you doing physically, like with concussion and the recovery from the stroke?
All in all, I'm probably as good as I'm going to get. How's that for that? I'm pretty good. My stroke probably ended up being, I lost probably somewhere maybe 10%, mostly a weakness on my left side. Just like if you threw a baseball at me, I might not react as fast. And sometimes you can sense it in my speech and I can trip over my words, and you catch yourself. And every once in a while it happens where you say something totally backwards and it comes out. And you can stop and try to fix it, or you just move on. I think people figure it out. Like, I think in WWE a few weeks ago, I said something about the fans are welcoming me back, and I end up saying something else like welcome back, or I left most of it out. And the more I thought about it, I said, they got it. They know what I was trying to say. And I just kept moving on. And my son, because sometimes I'll stop and try to re-explain it, and he's used to that. And it's like, just keep going. And it's like he gets it. And he told me the next day, he goes, "I'm so glad you didn't go back and try to fix that. Just that you just kept going." And it's true. Just little things like that.
What do you think the match is going to be like with Vince? Do you have it like going through your head? You haven't wrestled.
I have no idea. Well, I don't want to break anyone's heart, but I mean, the sad truth is that the Bret Hart that used to wrestle, the best there is, best there was, that guy with the pink tights and all that.
You got to wear the pink tights again.
No, I'll never wear those again. That's where I draw the line with the character and that one. That guy was, right till the day he took him off, was still the best.
He was the best.
And you get no argument from me.
What was your best match on the topic of that? What was your favorite?
Ever?
Yeah, what was your favorite? Owen, Bulldog, Roddy?
It's hard to say, but I think my favorite would have been Wembley with the Bulldog. Not just because of the match itself, but just the time period and how wrestling fans were in those days. If you watch Wembley Stadium and you just watch the crowd, you don't even watch the wrestling, you get an understanding for how passionate they were about wrestling. They loved, and the wrestling was totally real to them, at least when they were inside the buildings and stuff. There's a pureness of that wrestling fan. And the good guy struggle that I had with Davey in front of that kind of crowd, and doing all those moves and having everybody think from the first 2 or 3 minutes that this was the end of the match, to do that for another 45 minutes where they're jumping up and jumping down or a sign. It was just so intense. Like, the fans were so serious, and it was the perfect night, perfect crowd, and the perfect match.
What changed it for the fan? Was it Vince with the whole Attitude Era and everything like that?
Even before that, I think it was the internet. The internet changed wrestling, because the wrestlers basically went from town to town, and they did a great one. Once the wrestlers sort of work out their basic storyline or their match, a lot of times they'll just take it from one show to the next. And once you tweak your match to it's like it's as good as it's going to get, and it's perfect. Like with matches I used to have with Owen or Curt Henning. You get where you have this perfect match, and you just go back the next day and you do it again. It's like a cookie cutter. You just stay on that. You just leave it the way it is. and you just keep doing it, doing it, doing it. But in the end, the internet wrestling fans would type what happened in the match to the next town. But even then, you couldn't really, it looked like it was the same match when you read it. But at the same time, the internet started wanting more and more information about what, basically, the spoilers of what they could do to take away all the suspense. And so, I don't know, it just became a time where the wrestling fans were getting smarter than the wrestlers, and it was always an ongoing tug of war with that. And I was a big, I didn't say anything to anybody about what I was doing. For that reason, I didn't like to ruin it for anybody, ever.
Yeah.
I always wanted it to, there is a Santa Claus, and, just enjoy the show. I never liked it when someone tell you everything that's going to happen. Like, I can remember getting to a building and some kids came up to me and they told me, you're going to be a bad guy next week. You're turning bad and all that. And it's like, I remember thinking, no, I'm not. I got a call a few days later, Vince McMahon told me I'm going to turn into a bad guy. What bothers me is that the kid knew before I did. And then you learn that's just, that just got bigger and bigger and bigger until it overtook the business. And there's probably just as many fans that enjoy ruining it for everybody by telling everybody what's going to happen. Right. That's part of there's a feeding frenzy of wrestling fans that feed off all that stuff.
Well, things are getting busy here. We're in BJ's gym. Why are we here? You chose this location.
Because it was central located, and my own house is a little messy.
But I mean, there's posters of you here. Do you train here? Do you work out?
Yeah, I do train here, and this is a great hardcore gym that a lot of the wrestlers trained here. You see a lot of the posters on the wall.
You got dad on the wall too.
Bulldog, and it's a bit of a shrine still for. And a lot of guys that trained here. This is where all the Hart generation were trained. Natty and TJ and Harry and Teddy Hart, the infamous Teddy Hart.
I don't know.
So bad
Hart.
He can't get hired. He makes Dennis the Menace look, like he should be in the Hall of Fame for world's worst, baddest kids. Right next to a big statue by Brother Smith.
I'm sure he'd love to hear that.
They'd both be proud.
They would be. All right. On the topic of wrestling changing with the internet, what do you think MMA has done to it? Do you think that's kind of taken things away a little bit too?
Oh, I'm sure it has. I mean, it's hard not to get pulled into the MMA and how, a lot of they're basically what real wrestling, basically what they're doing is a lot different than what the old shooters in pro wrestling were doing back in the 20s. It's just the same type of people that got into wrestling the way it is now, and it flourished because the way wrestling worked in the 20s or something like that. I think it was Jack Dempsey was knocking everybody out in one round, and Babe Ruth broke the home run record, or I think it was 26 or something like that, or whatever. But it was just so, things were small. Everything was faster and faster. And wrestling matches back then were about an hour and a half long, or they wrestled for 4 hours or something with a headlock on, and no one would submit. And it got too boring, and they needed to kind of spice it up, and they just started to change it up, and that eventually evolved into where pro wrestling is today. But MMA, I think... do
you like it? Are you a fan?
Yeah, I'm a fan. Yeah, for sure. I have a lot of respect for it. I mean, I'm so glad that I went into pro wrestling now. When I watch that and I go, I'm so glad that I only pretended to hurt somebody.
Well, you never hurt anyone.
I've got a conscience.
Claim to fame.
I could never beat a friend of mine like that. I don't fight with my friends. And watching UFC, I know these guys are friends and they fight each other and they hurt each other. And I couldn't be paid enough money to do that.
Did Ken ever... What was it like to work with Ken? Did you ever fight Shamrock?
Yeah, I fought Ken. Ken was a solid guy. He was a tank. He was one of the most solid, well put together guys I ever wrestled.
His transition was good to professional wrestling?
Yeah, it was good, but he was the kind of guy that, he didn't look like he looked like an impressive guy, but he looked like a lot of other wrestlers. But I swear, when you picked up Ken Shamrock for a body slam, he weighed 5,000 pounds. He was like cement. I mean, he was just really well put together. But in what you're saying about UFC or MMA, when I think of my match with Steve Austin, WrestleMania 13, and I think it shows you the best of what pro wrestling offered for that kind of fix, that violent fix that UFC needs, like when they watch these guys punch each other in the blood and all that. They used to get that from wrestling. And they used to get it in matches like the one I had with Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13, where it just became so real in the blood, and you know, it was a very physical kind of violent match, and people love that, and but that's kind of, wrestling's gone now, and UFC's moved into that market, and they've got that all to themselves. So wrestling, I see today, is more of a family programming type thing. It's a step down for grandpa can now watch wrestling with his kids as it is right now. And that's good, and that leaves the UFC to a whole different market of serious fighting enthusiasts that you know, wrestling only pretended to appease a long time ago.
What do you think of the state of the WWE right now? I mean, well, I guess WWF for you always, right? Are you
Well,
comfortable saying WWE?
I can do both. I've been reprogrammed, you know, like everyone else.
But I mean, you have guys like Taker, Shawn, Triple H. These are all the stars when you left, and they're still running the show now.
Well, the funny thing about all that is, and I'm curious to talk to some of them about it, is that they are right where I was when they screwed me. So I'm looking at Undertaker or Shawn Michaels, and how would you feel right now if somebody screwed you at this point in time in your career?
Yeah. Because
the guy younger and you didn't have enough, you know, didn't have enough respect for you. And you start to see that, and you go, I'm sure that they'd all go, geez, now I know everything that you were trying to do and what you stood up for and what you were. I think that's more clear all the time. And I don't know how long Undertaker's got left, and I don't know how long Shawn Michaels has got left. And there's a few guys in there, that company, that are pretty beat up physically. So I mean, I don't know how long they got left. There's always a role like the one I've got, where you can somehow hang in there doing that. But I see Shawn Michaels and Undertaker looking to take some kind of a long break in the not too distant future. A deserved one, you know. They both worked pretty hard for a long time. I think of Steve Austin and some of these guys that have already rode off into the sunset. It's easy to do that sometimes, and I credit them for hanging in there, and they're basically still the leaders of the company.
Yeah.
You know, so.
What did you feel about The Wrestler when you saw the movie?
It was
kind
kind
of
of
representation.
In its own way, it's a fair representation. But I thought, like before the movie came out, I thought finally we're going to get our fair shake. We've been slammed and put down and knocked and given no credit for years for being athletes or actors or anything. It's like we're circus. We're out in some category all to ourselves that no one cares about. Like when there's media or news, or there's going to be a newspaper story, they don't ever want to talk about wrestlers, or unless it's bad. We're the, you know, we've always had usually negative press, or roll your eyes kind of mentality to pro wrestling. And I thought, well, finally there'll be a movie that will sort of say something good about us. Maybe when I walk out of the theater, I'll be able to kind of puff out my chest and, oh yeah, I was a wrestler. Or, you know, some kid says he wants to grow up and be a wrestler. You don't go, are you an idiot? You know, like, what are you, stupid? You know, it's like I thought maybe something good to make us proud of wrestling. And I know I've had lots of great moments where I'm really been proud of everything I did. And I think that comes across in my book about how proud I was of the career I had. And when I watched that movie, I thought, that's about bums and losers. And, you know, wrestlers aren't all losers, and they're not all bums. And that's the movie seemed to paint. There wasn't one guy in that movie that had any kind of hope, or a good life, or, you know, a nice family. They're all washed up losers, and that bothered me a little bit. That we're always sort of pegged. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of washed up losers in wrestling, but you know, they're all sort of pegged into one category all the time. You know, we're never athletes. You know, a lot of us are athletes. You know, I just found out last week, someone was telling me that someone was trying to get me into the Sports Hall of Fame here, which was his own doing. It just annoyed me to have him come back and say, no, I was not an athlete. I know wrestling's not a sport. And, you know, fair enough, but you know, I accomplished a lot, and where do I get my credit? I'm not going to get an acting award, or actor is not going to pull me up and say, for all those years of wrestling, here's your, you know. And if the sports world isn't going to turn their back on you too and say, you were nothing to us, you know, I think that's why wrestlers for years have always been very defensive about what they do, because we don't ever get that kind of respect.
The WWE Hall of Fame isn't the same, kind of?
Well, you know, it's nice, but that's nice, yeah. I would never put that down or anything. It's deserved. Like my father going in this year, it's important that, I think 100 years from now, if you're going to look back on what the pioneers of pro wrestling and who took it to where it ends up years from now, you're gonna have to tip your hat to my father, and him not being in there, and someone like people in my family who are not the case, but I mean, if they were opposed to it, all you do, like even me going back to WWE, me not going back, I just fade off into obscurity, and that's the end of that's all you ever hear about Bret Hart. That he was this bitter, you know, like I said before. But I think you have a right to be remembered, and especially if you contributed. And I know my dad did, I know I did, I know my brother Owen did, and I'm sure that's something that should happen someday, somewhere down the road.
Oh, for sure. What would your dad say about your return?
I think he'd be kind of happy about it.
Yeah, that you've mended the bridges.
I think my dad and my mom would have been, and to know that I'm sort of in my own way trying to maybe help bring the family together and do something for my niece and nephew, and doing like that, and that is sort of an objective of mine. Doing that and just getting back with wrestling and being on good terms with it is a good feeling for me.
Awesome. I have a list of a couple of names here. If you could just give me some thoughts, that kind of thing on everyone. We'll start with Owen.
Well, I think about him every day. Owen, I mostly find that you know me, you'll laugh because whenever anything goes wrong, like the lights won't work or you know, something happens where I lock my keys in the car or whatever, or I can't find something, any kind of problem I get where it seems like someone's doing this on purpose, it's like I'm always looking up and going, I know this is Owen. And
One last laugh.
And Owen's constantly pulling jokes on me. Either that or it's my imagination, but then either way I think about him all the time. Because it's pretty regular.
Is it? That's right.
My kids all know, it's like, it's Owen. Just don't even worry about it, it's Owen. The remote suddenly doesn't work. It's like, I know it's Owen, you know.
That's good though that you have that memory. It's nice that it comes up every once in a while.
I mean, I think of Owen, and I think it's the same for just about everybody I know. You think of him and you smile, because it makes you think of some kind of joke or something that he did or something funny, or it's usually a happy thought.
That storyline with you and him fighting, that must have been one of the better times in your life.
It was a great time for me, and what I loved about it was how much it meant to Owen, and it really did mean the world to him. And he had a very we had a very special relationship after that. For all, I mean, we always had a special relationship before that, but the fact that I worked with him and we did it the way we did it and had the matches that we had, I think he was really proud of himself and really proud of me. And I think if I ever stepped into those shoes of being his big brother, it was when we did all that kind of stuff. And I think he really he loved those times. And when I look back on it, it's all good memories for me. I do kind of get a little annoyed when a lot of people think that we hated each other, you know, and that was all part of a storyline. And
then it worked.
Yeah, and it worked. But I mean, I throughout that whole period, it was never anything about it was the love between two brothers and whatever.
Next one, Eric Bischoff.
Eric Bischoff.
How come they didn't know how to use you properly?
Eric Bischoff, plain and simply, was a guy that never understood wrestling, never knew a good idea from a bad idea, and was the worst possible guy to put in a position of power.
And he's back.
He was a nice enough guy with me, and he was always nice enough, but nice isn't about, that's not the question. If you ask me if he's a nice guy, sure, he's a nice guy, but as far as brilliant or a good wrestling mind, forget it. I could find some guys out on the street here that know more about wrestling than Eric Bischoff ever.
Or in Calgary, it's a wrestling town.
Yeah, but he was bad.
Steve Austin.
Steve Austin was one of my most favorite guys to work with. We had great chemistry. I mean, no matter what day we wrestled or how tired we were or wherever we were, we always had a great match. He was really passionate. That's one thing I always remember about Steve, is that he always wanted to have a phenomenal match every night. And he took that attitude into the ring every night. He always worked hard. He was just a perfect guy to work with, great guy to work with, great verbally, and he had so many other skills, like his look and his talk and all that. But I kind of caught him just at the right time. And when I think of the Hitman and Steve Austin, that's when those matches in that time was probably the best matches maybe in the history of the wrestling. It's a shame that we didn't get to wrestle even more, because we're just right at the top of it. We had lots of room left for a rivalry that would have lasted for years.
Maybe on the opposite end of that spectrum, Shawn Michaels.
Shawn, you know, I thought that when I went back, and even sort of swallowing my pride and going back, that I would be, sorry that I did it. And, see him sort of walking past me with his nose up kind of in the dressing room. Would have bothered me that he didn't acknowledge the big step I took and sort of coming back and doing all this. And I thought I would come forward and take the step forward, but that he wouldn't necessarily take the step forward either. That it was just going to be sort of a pretend truce or whatever. But that's not how it was. I took that step, and I noticed after that it was really a huge relief for him. And it was like a forgiveness, I guess, that he really needed. I think to set him free. I think he was troubled by it for years. And I realized after we sort of had our little in-ring moment there, that it was all quite real. I never saw Shawn until I got to the ring. I saw him one time in the cafeteria, and we had a little talk for about 20 seconds. And I told him I'd go looking for him later. I never did see him, and we did our little interview in the ring. It was pretty real.
And so that was I heard somewhere that it wasn't scripted too.
It wasn't really scripted. There was a sort of an outline of what we could say to each other, and we followed all that. But the sincerity, I think, on his part, I thought was pretty genuine, and I thought that he appreciated it. It was like someone's taken a weight off his back and setting him free. And I've noticed ever since I've been around him that he's in a good mood, and it seems to me that it's quite real, that he's quite appreciative of that step, and that tells me that it was a good thing. I don't have to feel bad like I went back and swallowed my pride and he's still a jerk off, but he's not really so bad, and I that's the most you could wish for it. I mean, the truth is, I think that we both were responsible for a lot of that. We were like two guys pulling each other's tails, plus Vince, I think, kind of stirring up Shawn at one time was a very close friend of mine, and I'm not opposed to being his friend. If he wants to be friends with me, or like I miss a lot of the guys like Steve Austin and Undertaker and different wrestlers, we were close friends at one time. And someday when they get through their careers in the wrestling, maybe you can pick up your friendships. And if that happened with Shawn, that would be all right.
Was he good to work with?
Shawn?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was always good to work with. He was always a professional, except for that last night.
Yeah, fair enough. Hulk Hogan.
Hulk. I don't know. I used to be a big fan of Hulk's. I'm not too big a fan anymore. He just kind of, I know he stopped, he said this about me one time, which I found really offensive. But in fact, it's true for him, is that he forgot about being one of the boys. Like, he used to be just one of the wrestlers. And he was our hero in the dressing room too. He sold out and kind of got wrestling off the ground in such a way that we're all really as mesmerized by him as the fans were. We thought he was the greatest thing that ever. He fed our families. He got wrestling into this whole bigger realm. But in the end, he turned out to be. When I think of Hulk Hogan and I look back now, he was a guy that was spoiled rotten, and deservedly so in those days. But I mean, he talks about his life on the road and wrestling in his book and stuff. Hulk Hogan had the easiest schedule in the world. He flew in on a Learjet. He landed. He could show up anytime he wanted. All the things that they criticized me for, he did every night. He worked about 3 times a week, twice a week, and that was only when he wanted to. And he made a ton of money, and the rest of us, got the drippings. And that's kind of. And then once he got out of the business, he never did anything for any other wrestler. It was all about what he could do for himself. And you can look at what he did with me in WCW, and I think that was just a case of him saying, don't do anything with him. And I sat on the sidelines, and just when that company needed some revenue, an influx of big revenue, Bishoff, they needed to put the 2 biggest names that they had in the company they were paying the most money to. Why not put them against each other?
Of course.
It never ever happened because Hulk was too narrow-minded and too selfish to want to work with somebody else. Like, he was always it was all about him, and he didn't care about the business. If he cared about the business, he would have done that for the company when they were starting to slide. Yeah. But they were so full of themselves, it was like Rome was burning, and they were all too worried about the stupid things. It was really Hulk was always I don't like him going to TNA. well, I don't know what he's going to do in TNA for guys like just watching TNA and seeing what they've done with AJ Styles and that old bag of bones Ric Flair. It's like, you know, you realize that, you know, these guys are not going to make that company better. They're going to make it worse, and they're going to ruin what was maybe a good company struggling to kind of get its head above. They're looking for more exposure, and I think they've sold themselves on Hulk Hogan's worldwide popularity, but I don't know if they've taken into account that ever since all these family troubles with him and his ex-wife now and his son and the little jail calls and all that, I think his worldwide popularity has plummeted to, you know, I don't put Hulk Hogan in a much different more category than Jimmy Swaggart and some of these other guys.
Well, the last one. Well, actually, no. Let's go Curt Henning. I'm curious, 'cause I'm sure you worked some good matches with him.
I love. If you asked me if I could pick one guy to wrestle, like I had to go in right now and wrestle him, be Curt Henning. Every night, every time. He was. I said it in my book. I said it was like spy versus spy. There's a Mad magazine. You know, two spies. We were just like that, and we were always such great chemistry and a lot of humor. We always had a few laughs every night in the ring that people were never aware of. Where he was always a lot of fun. I can remember lots of times doing all kinds of things like drop kicks and clotheslines, and I'd be laughing my head off, like trying not to show that I was ready to fall over laughing. And he was always a funny guy.
Vince.
Well, there's some things I'm not sure of. You know, I've worked I think four Mondays at this point, and so I think at this point I think Vince is a change guy. I think I can only assume that a couple of $1 billion might do that for somebody, make him a more happier person. And I know that the stuff that I've done with Vince seems to have really lit him up a little bit, and he seems like he is really loving the role that he's playing, and he's excited about what he's going to do next week, and you know, he's really into it. And that you got probably anyone that doesn't think Vince McMahon's got the greatest mind in wrestling. He's always had a brilliant mind for wrestling and where to take it, and the vision that he sees is it's a pretty deep, long vision. So I think when I see Vince, you know, and going back, I kind of knew that he would be able to make this worthwhile, worth doing. If you're interested, I mean, that was my attitude with him. I'm interested if you're interested. If you're not interested, let's just, you know, move on, you know. And at the same time, he's been interested, and they've got on board, and they've treated me really well with this whole thing that's happened so far. And I expect it should work out all pretty well. And my end feeling about Vince is that he probably feels pretty bad about what happened with Owen and things that happened in my family, and even what happened with me. And you know, he owns some of that, and a lot of it with Owen, of course, with Owen. But I also know that what happened with Owen was an accident. Had nothing to do with anybody but the guy that failed to understand how to do the rigging. And so it was a mistake, a human error, and it was a tragic thing, but it had nothing to do with the company or where, you know. So I think, that said, and what happened with me, if you can sort of, you know, I said I forgave it a long time ago when I had my stroke and he called me in the hospital. And I think I really did have that moment of just glad that it was off my back and be on good terms with him. Vince was a lot like a father to me once upon a time. And then he, you know, did that to me in Montreal. And it hurt for a long time, but I mean, I think everyone kind of wished it had gone down a different way, or I think they wished they'd had a smarter sense of what, maybe a better way of doing it. But that's what prevailed at the time, and they have to live with that, and I can.
Well, it kind of worked out pretty good though for both of you at the same time. You have this great story to tell. He became this big bad guy in his own world. Both kind of made it well.
Well, in a way, you're right, because I know that for me, what's defined me in this country, and maybe defined me all around the world, is the one guy that stood up for himself.
You're the ultimate good guy.
You know, the only guy that ever did anything real in wrestling was me that day in Montreal, kind of thing. And it's like, you know, there's been lots of real situations, sometimes too real, you know, when you think of things that happened in the last 30 years. But it definitely defined me, and I think it the more, you know, and they try to, you know, whitewash it all the time and tell you something else about it, or and it was always about me being, for a long time, it was about me being petulant, or you know, not a company guy, or a hard guy to deal with. And anyway, everything I ever said in the beginning and everything they said in the beginning, and it's like all these years later, everything I said turned out to be true, and everything they said turned out to be a bunch of baloney. And I think that defined me. And people, you know, I always say when people see Shawn Michaels, and that Wrestling with Shadows plays all the time, at least twice a year in Canada on different A&E and different Canadian shows. And I think when you watch Shawn Michaels humping the flag, where he puts it down in the ring and actually starts, you know, I think that gets your blood going in this country so much. That, and then you realize, like, you know, that he punched this guy out and took wrestling so seriously that he overreacted. No, I wouldn't say overreacted, but reacted so strongly about it that I think you have to be proud of that moment. And I think that's probably, I know that's the reason I got voted in this country for being number 39 greatest Canadian.
Speaking of which, the last name on my list is Bret Hart.
And what about him?
Well, how do you want to be remembered?
I think I want to be remembered as someone that followed his heart. Somebody that never aged, really. Like I still feel that I still have a lot of my friends from elementary school, believe it or not. And when I'm with them, I'm not Bret the Hitman Hart. Even though I was always kind of Bret the Hitman Hart then, even as a kid. I mean, I was always wrestling and everything. But I just sort of feel that I never really sold myself out. You know, that I've always followed my heart, and I've stayed pretty true to myself. And I'm somebody that wakes up in the morning, and when I look in the mirror, I'm happy. A, happy I'm alive. B, happy with who I am. And I think that's, if you can be able to say that every day, and look in the mirror and see yourself and go, you know, I'm not a bad person, and I've always been pretty good to people, and I've always followed my heart, and I didn't have to trample on a lot of people to get what I wanted. You know, I'm really feels good knowing that I didn't have to stab a lot of people in the back to get where I got. And, you know, I can speak. You know, my book is my crowning achievement in a lot of ways, but it's like, here I am. You know, you can take whatever shots you want at me, but you know, good luck, because I've already taken most of the shots myself. You know.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
All right.
I appreciate it.